a.m. so whenever we want to get started.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks very much for coming out on a crisp morning here in January. We're obviously not doing any gardening today, but might as well start planning ahead, right? So we're thinking about, so just put yourself in a time frame of about 3 or 4 months from now. Hopefully 3, maybe 2.5 even. It's like whether it continues. We're going to talk about some of the favorite vegetables primarily. We'll do a little bit on fruit as part of this topic. My name is Yuri Kushner. It's pronounced Yuri, even though it's got J's at either end. I wanted symmetry, so I got it. But it's pronounced URI. I've been a master gardener for about 12, 13 years now. And I've been a gardener for well over 45 years. I specialize in both perennial gardening and vegetable gardening. And so that's one of the topics that I do. The Master Gardeners, we have a speakers bureau that actually gives lectures throughout the community. I think, and I'm also the coordinator of that speakers bureau. So this spring we're doing over 50 lectures here in Monroe County. Primarily, well, CountryMax has got 8 of them lined up over the course of a couple of months. We're also doing the Tinker Park, and almost every library has got 1 or 2 of these sessions. So if you're interested in other topics, keep looking for it. Either go on our Facebook page or community communications that come out from libraries and things like that to find. And they're all very good speakers. Oh, we got a whole bunch of people coming in now. There's a couple of seats there, some in the back. We may have to be standing. Okay, so we can move on to the first slide. All right. So first of all, how many of you are first-time gardeners? Good. Nobody. How many of you know more than I know? That's always good to know in advance too. Even if you're not a first-time gardener, this is a rule of thumb that you should all have in your mind. Always think big. Think about the full extent of the garden that you want to do. Well, whatever it is that you're doing, start small. Test it out, make sure it works, and then expand as you go along. So that's one of the things that some people kind of want to jump in on all full scale into this thing, and it's overwhelming. So let's move on to the next slide, since we're all experienced gardeners here. If we're talking about vegetable gardening, you have to start with 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. That's absolutely essential. And I'm talking, of course, in July, mid-June through July. You have to have 6 to 8 hours in order to have really good opportunity for growth. That doesn't mean you can't grow vegetables in less than 6 to 8 hours, but your chance of success just diminish very quickly. In my own garden, I have 13 to 14 hours of sun. It's positioned in such a way that, and with no obstruction from trees or other houses, other garages or whatever, that I can get as much as 13 hours, 14 hours in July, and that really makes it pop. It's good not to be in known wind direction, wind areas. Some plants just don't like wind. There are a few that do actually, surprisingly. Cucumbers, when they're grown up in trellis, it's actually like wind blowing through them. But that's far and few between, so stay away from wind. But that doesn't mean you want to be in the middle of trees either, because I'll tell you that now you're talking about competition for water, competition for nutrients, shade that it might create. You want to be close to your kitchen. I have a garden. Most of the things that are on here are mistakes I've made. Okay, so I'm telling you by my experience. Now you can have your own experience, but you'd rather listen and not do the things I did. I put my garden about 200 feet away from the house. It was done because I wanted to put an invisible fence in for the dog, and I wanted it outside of the invisible fence here. Right. Well, when I started that garden, I was 30-something years old, and 200 feet was nothing. Thank God, even today, 200 feet is nothing for me. But what is something for me is when I get out there, I said, oh, I forgot something. I have to walk back. So now it's 600 feet and you haven't done a thing yet, right? And then the phone rings and your wife says, hey, there's someone on the phone in here. I don't like to take my cell phone out to the garden. So now it's another 400 feet and I still haven't done a thing. And then I still have forgotten, I don't have enough fertilizer, I don't have enough this. I need a wheelbarrow, I didn't bring a bucket, whatever. And you can do 2,000 steps and you haven't, you've just started in your garden. If you're counting, I do, I count my steps on my Fitbit, but so that helps. But if you want to avoid that, and for other reasons, you want to be close to the kitchen. All right. When you do start a garden, or a new plot, you want to be sure you know the kind of soil you have. We have 2 more chairs that are separated over here. There's one at this end and one towards the back. You want to know your soil type. You can do that by having it evaluated, for example, at Cornell Crop Extension. But there are other places where they will evaluate your soil and give you a report on what you have. Obviously, knowing the kind of soil, whether it's very clay or very sandy, will determine what kind of nutrients you might want to put in it in order to enhance that soil. Organic material, and you'll see I use that so often in this presentation. I just go to OM. That means organic material. It's surprising soil is only 5 to 8% of soil is actually organic material. Most of it is air, water, and minerals. So it is almost essential that every year you have to add organic material to your garden, because the plants are pulling that stuff out. That's what helps them grow. So as a result, you have to keep adding it. So additions to the soil, particularly compost, is very good. If you're a gardener, you're almost invariably a compost. Having a proper pH level is important for the most part. Around here, most of the soil is in the range of 7, which is neutral soil. But there are some plants that do like more acidic soil, and as a result, by measuring where you are, knowing where you are, it helps you determine if you can do something to supplement, let's say, use sodium in order to reduce the pH. Let me tell you, it is very hard to reduce pH in soil in a garden plot that's in the ground. In a raised bed, you have some chance because you're really basically talking about a contained environment that you can control. In the ground, there's so many things happening underneath the ground that you're not aware of. Movement of water and moisture and air and so forth, that it's very hard to change the pH of a given plot of land. And you want to avoid things like standing water, a low spot that invariably drains to for your garden spot. Okay, next slide. Here are the families of plants, of vegetables that we'll be talking about. And sometimes you might find some relationships you never imagined that they were in the same family. But it's important to, this helps you because these things in the cucurbit family, for example, have common characteristics. They're not identical, obviously. They're very unique. The difference between a squash and a melon or a cucumber, obviously you can know the differences between those. But they have certain characteristics that are the same, and as a result, they're prone to the same kind of disease or mildews or whatever. So sometimes having them in different portions of your garden, as opposed to having them all together, is helpful, because this way, if you do get some kind of a beginning of a disease, it won't necessarily spread to all the others automatically, because they're all vulnerable to the same kind of thing. This is particularly pertinent in this solanum family. If you ever had tomato blight, that's a killer. Basically, you've lost your crop for that year. And particularly if it's a spring blight. If you have the winter, the fall blight, sometimes you'll be able to get something out of the garden before it really starts to set in. But one of the things you have to do is basically clean that garden bed up completely. Take everything that you can see that may have come off that tomato and clean it out, and don't put it into your compost pile, but put it in a garbage bag and get rid of it. But the next step after cleaning up is basically you can't plant another tomato plant in that spot for a whole year. But not only tomato plants, because they're vulnerable to the same kind of thing. So you really want to avoid putting another solanum in the same spot that you had a problem with solanum one year. It would be much better to pick something else that won't be as vulnerable to that blight. Probably the best solution is to leave that area just alone for a whole year. But if you want to grow something you want to grow, don't grow another solanum. So, you can just look at that. There's no real point I want to make about that other than that these are related to each other. They may be prone to the same kind of problems, and sometimes it's just curious to see how they're related to each other. All right, Tony. All right, so we're going to talk about another thing we want to mention here is water. Clearly, there is a kind of a minimum level of about 1 inch of water a week for your garden. That can be accomplished either through rain or through the irrigation that you do. If you have especially warm weather, you probably need to up that to 1.5 inches, maybe even as much as 2 inches. And there are some plants that will, in particular, require a lot of water. So that those, I think, we'll identify throughout the presentation. Let's see what else I want to get across here. You can put a rain gauge in because you don't want to just guess at it. You want to know how much water and/or rain you've collected in that bed. So you might want to put a rain gauge in. But a very inexpensive rain gauge is a tuna fish can because that's about 1 inch. So that as a result, you can just put a couple of tuna fish cans in your garden and let that fill up 1 week, and then have a habit every Sunday of dumping any water that's in there and supplementing. Obviously, as you see that it's not getting up to that 1 inch level, adding irrigation, but then dumping the water and starting all over again the following week. All right, let's move on to the next one. And so there's a couple of things you want to do. You want to avoid watering overhead. So whether it's a sprinkler system or the turning heads, what you want to do is, as much as possible, water the base of the plant as opposed to overhead on the leaves. There's some things that can, first of all, you're losing an awful lot if you're doing overhead water to evaporation. And you do have some potential for issues on the leaves of the plants from that water. Now, you can't avoid it, and if you can't afford a underground or irrigation, drip irrigation system, you've got to get the water to the plant. So this is the best way to do it, obviously. But I try to avoid, if you're doing it with a hose, definitely avoid spraying the leaves, go right to the ground as much as possible. But another thing you can do is when you water, not just how much you water and how you water, but when you water. The ideal times for watering is either early morning or early evening. In the early morning, you're avoiding doing it in the midday, hot sun, evaporation. In the early evening, watering is you want to get the water out of the surface before the overnight period, because that if you have it quite wet during the evening overnight, you can start creating some kind of problems. You can have fungus problems and so forth. So you want to water it about 6 o'clock in the evening or 6 o'clock in the morning. Those are probably the ideal times for watering. That's when you have to water. So it's necessary. Okay, and the other thing is, the way you measure whether you're really watered is whether the water is getting down deep into the soil. Remember, the roots of the plant or the seeds usually are 1, 2, 4 inches below grade. So if you think you've watered, you've done a little bit of spraying, and you think you watered because everything looks wet, that doesn't necessarily mean it's soaked down to 4 inches. So again, another technique is to actually use some of the watering gauges actually have a spike on it. It's also for both temperature and for water contact. And what you really want to do is know how much it is 4 inches below grade. as opposed to necessarily on the surface. All right, let's move on. Here's just a couple of examples of drip irrigation systems. This is kind of the, the can't be out of watering. This is the best way to really do it. You're minimizing a water loss to evaporation. You put it on a timer so you can hit that 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night, whichever one you prefer to do it. And it's very, you don't have to do anything other than have the water on. It can get pretty expensive though. Getting water to your garden and getting it in between all the rows of your plants. And it kind of constrains you to some extent because once you put the irrigation system down, you don't want to necessarily plant around it differently than you've done in the past. So it kind of constrains you to what you were doing in the past, often constrains you to the same vegetables that you were doing in the past, which contradicts another rule, which is you should rotate periodically your vegetables, maybe every 3-4 years. It's not essential to do it every year, but the amount of nutrients they take out of the soil will deplete that soil pretty quickly, 3 to 4 years, and as a result, you need to put different things in different places. In fact, legumes, which were the first one on our list, are the unique culprit in this whole vegetable family. They actually contribute minerals to the soil. They are the only ones of the vegetables that have the capability, in conjunction with some bacteria in the soil, to generate nitrogen and add it back to the soil. So often, that's, for example, if you're doing a small patch of corn is a huge feeder from the garden. So it will deplete the soil quite quickly, the 2 or 3 years. That you don't even go to 4-year periods. But adding legumes to that after you've taken the corn out for 1 year, take a break, put legumes in there, it will contribute nitrogen to that particular area of the garden. All right, move on. I am now a 100% advocate of raised beds. I've converted all of my garden beds over the years into raised beds. I used to do everything in ground. There's so many advantages to raised beds. First of all, they form kind of a natural barrier for weeds and for critters. Obviously, if they're 8 to 10 inch wall of wood, it's hard to penetrate for the weeds. Weeds have to go over the top to get in there. Now they do, and birds will drop in there. I'm not saying it's weed free, but it does prevent a considerable amount of the weed problem that you have in an in-ground bed. The soil does drain much better than in ground. Actually, it can drain. In fact, if there's one disadvantage of a raised bed, that's it. It can actually drain too quick. So one of the things you have to do when you build a raised bed is ensure that the corners are not too tight. If they're absolutely tight, if they're waterproof, it's going to retain the water too well. If they're quite loose, it's going to drain very, very quickly. So that's one of the things you have to do in considering the construction of your bed. I think they're very attractive. They allow for a much easier rotation concept because you say, okay, here's bed 1. Let's say if you have 4 beds. Well, it's very easy to say, when I grew bed 1, I moved to bed 2, I had 2, move it to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 1. Very easy to keep track of that. Although one of the things you should do as part of your tracking of anything is have a log, have a journal. Write down the good things, write down the bad things in particular. So that when you had your first tomato, when you had the list, but also, hey, I spotted this problem and how you dealt with it, because all these things will come in handy. Perennial vegetable gardening or perennial gardening, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You're going to be doing this hopefully for 30, 45 years, like I've been doing, and you learn every year from your mistakes. And so having that journal is the best way to document those mistakes, unfortunately. Oh, I thought I had a good question there. Very conducive to to trellising and so forth, and you see that in the next picture, next slide. You can put in all kinds of, I hope that's not as washed out as it worked for me, but you can put in all kinds of trellises for cucumbers or peas, and these kind of containers are great for keeping critters out, and they also allow you to extend the season. If you put a tarp over that, particularly a cloth, a special cloth tarp that will still let sunlight in, but keeps a little bit warmer in there. It's a way of extending your season. And if you can get 2 weeks more at the beginning of the season by starting earlier under this cover, and if you can extend the season by 2 weeks at the back end to so you can do that final harvesting of some things, adding 4 weeks to your growing season around here is 15 to 20%. So it's not insignificant. So it's a lot easier to do that by attaching it to the walls of the raised bed and so forth, as opposed to going in the ground. Next slide. I told you about legumes. These are wonder plants. In conjunction with bacteria in the soil, what happens is they have these nodules that generate the nitrogen and then release it into the soil. We had I'm involved with the YMCA gardens. I'm the sponsor and kind of the mentor of the program there. We had last year we had edamame, which are legumes, and they had absolutely perfect nodules on them. And so we were able to have something like 100 kids all together come through, daycare, child care kids come through. We each gave them a plant to take home and show their parents. It was a great learning experience for us to see that clear and vivid, but they look just like that.
So when you plant these legumes, and say like a rabbit got the greens, it's still okay to leave the roots in there? Or?
Well, it probably not, because they won't grow without the tops. They really work as a combined system.
They wouldn't put roots in around. So.
They probably would put some. Probably what they have generated, created up until that point. But it wouldn't be an ongoing process. All right, let's move on to the next. So probably the most favorite legume that everyone enjoys is growing peas. You can the nice thing about peas, in fact, all of the legumes for that matter, are early crops. So around here, there is a real chance that you can plant peas sometime in, I hate to say this, but even late March, definitely in the first 2 weeks of April, despite the real potential of frost still ahead, because frost around here supposedly goes away about the 15th of May. It used to be Memorial Day weekend. Now they've kind of said with global warming, it's a little bit earlier. I usually have, this is the first thing I plant. There's about 3 or 4 that as soon as I think it's good. And the way I measure that is obviously the temperature of the soil itself, the air temperature that I'm seeing, and the forecast for the next week, 2 weeks, 30-day forecast to see what they're saying for the lows, because what you're looking for is the low temperature. How low will it get overnight? Yeah.
Could you also talk about what varieties you use to grow?
I think there's something in here on varieties, but I can't recall whether this presentation was about 70 pages altogether, and I've cut it down to 37. I can't remember whether I left that in or not. So you can start them early. They are relatively quick in germinating and seeing some growth, so that you know what you've done. It's very important to stake these things, to give them something to grow on. They do like to grow up in the air. Just having them loose on the ground just does not produce the same kind of yields if they're growing up in the air. These are some that don't mind the wind either. And there's real opportunity, depending on how quickly you start in the spring, to have two crops. It's interesting how October and April are relatively the same. If you took the average temperature of those 2 months, it's the same. The moisture is about the same between those 2 months. The only difference is, of course, in April, the amount of sunlight is ascending, where in October it's descending. But other than that, they're quite similar. So that if you time things right, you can still get a crop in, a second crop of peas by planting it, let's say in mid-September. Take advantage of the month of October and be able to harvest before let's say November 15th. So it's a great opportunity for that. It says 1 to 4 inches. I actually am not even with peas. I'm not too concerned because they're growing up. They're not interfering with each other. There's just very little growth below the surface. You can really keep that as short as possible. Get more plants in. You've got a nice. I have some trellises that expand this way, so it gives me the opportunity to have a small base of peas or get a whole set of a big plant out of it. Let's move on to the next slide. See if we have. So there's some examples of different ways of staking peas, but as you can see, everything is up in the air. That's essential for peas. Next slide. No, I must have taken that slide out. What I like is edible pod peas, because this way you can just, in fact, it's wonderful if you're working on the garden. Just go to your garden and just grab a few and have a snack in the middle of it. So edible pod peas are the variety that any edible pod I will take. Let's see, there are Alaskan peas that are very tasty, and the reason for that, and they're conducive to our climate, obviously, because they're experiencing much worse than we do, and they know they have a short growing season, so that those are actually quite up. All right, so we're going to talk about beans. Again, you start out with sunny. That's essential. They are not quite as good for getting out in the ground early in the season. So you really want to wait until the frost risk is gone. And you see that temperature greater than 60, best 70 to 90. You'll find that with just about every seed, and you see that on the seed packet. Often on the back of the seed packet, you'll find some information. Don't disregard that, because it will often tell you the depth of the seed, the distance apart of the seeds, and so forth. Obviously, with experience, you can vary that if you think you can do better than what they suggest. But they've spent some research money to try to figure this out, and they're not trying to just get you to buy seeds in 2023. They want you to buy seeds for a long time with them. So they're going to give you good advice. But they'll all have the same situation. You can plant at this temperature. It's even better if you plant at a higher temperature. You're going to get much closer to the 100% germination of the seed at the higher temperatures. But if you're willing to take some risk and have some misses, let's say, in your row, and to be able to get started early, particularly in northern climates, if you want to start early, I would recommend starting at the temperatures that are a little bit riskier. Here's one that you want to water well when you first plant it. And of course, I'm assuming that in the case of beans, you're starting from seed as opposed to plants. There's some that are just very logical that you start with plants. There's some that are much more logical to just go with the seed, because you have plenty of time for it to germinate. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And here's some variety of different kinds of stakes for peas. Now, if you're talking bush beans, you go back, I skipped that. If you're talking bush beans, you really don't need to stake them. they will form on their own. A little bit of help will never hurt, but they will almost stand up on their own. You'll find that in tomatoes. We'll talk about the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, but they're the same characteristic. If you're talking a pole bean, that's how it got its name. It needs a pole. It needs a tall place to go up to, and you'll get the benefit of beans all the way down that pole. Okay. Tomatoes are probably the most popular plant of all. Let's see, what are the key points I wanted to make on this one? They love organic material in the soil. So I actually, when I plant tomatoes, I will put compost as opposed to anything else. So I dig up the soil out of the hole and I fill it up with compost. To really give it a nice organic material bath, so to speak. And the interesting thing about tomatoes that they've discovered over the years is that you can plant them deeper and deeper in the soil. It used to be that you would plant right at the same level as it if you bought a 6-pack of tomatoes, and you saw where it was in the soil in the peat pot, in the pod. You can go much deeper than that. In fact, what I do when I buy tomatoes, I think there's a recommendation here of buy tomatoes with about 6 or 7 leaves on them. True, but you know what I do? I break off about 5 of those leaves. I only leave the very top leaves. And I'll bury that tomato plant all the way to that level. So that the tomato may start out 8 inches when I buy it, but the only thing showing above ground is maybe 1 or 2 inches. All those places where I broke off the stems will actually be sources of new root growth underground. And what your goal is when buying a tomato is to get that tomato to develop as many roots as possible, as healthy as possible. In fact, if you buy a tomato that already has a flower on it, or heaven forbid, buy one that has a little tomato on it, take them off. Sorry. For the first 2 weeks in the ground, you want that tomato to only do one thing: build roots. You'll have plenty of time to produce the flower. So if your goal is to be the first tomato on the block, I guess you keep the tomato on there. But if your goal is to have the best tomatoes on the block, I would recommend you get rid of the flower, get rid of the tomato, focus on the roots, build that root system as well as you can. So there's 2 types of tomatoes we'll talk about. We'll talk about determinate tomatoes and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes, again, just like the bush bean, stand on their own. You really don't have to support them very much. They have a very narrow window for when their tomatoes become ripe, and you go at them and you gather all the tomatoes off that plant almost, and the plant's done. Indeterminate tomatoes just can get out of control. You see some of the pictures of people that grow tomatoes that are 12 feet tall. Those are indeterminate tomatoes. Those are not little bush tomatoes. And so it's your job to contain them, and your job to support them. So if you're talking about tomato cages, that's for indeterminate tomatoes. You'll find that most of the grape or cherry tomatoes are indeterminate, and then there's some known tomatoes like big beef and early girl and things like that are indeterminate. So those will be tomatoes that will produce over a longer period of time, and again, you have to control it. You actually have to top them off in some cases or break off branches that may have gotten out of the tomato cage, because they're going to produce more than you can imagine. I'm now down to I only grow 3 tomatoes a year. That's it, 3 indeterminate tomatoes, and that gives me more than enough. Even though I have lots of places where I could put tomatoes. Tomatoes do not like cold weather. So if you are either starting plants indoors in your basement, or you buy plants from a place like CountryMax or garden factories and garden stores around the community, you do have to go through a process of hardening them to make sure that they are ready for planting. So with tomatoes, I used to follow the Memorial Day rule when I plant my tomatoes. By doing that, there were some times where I missed windows of I could have gotten in there a couple of weeks early, but there's also opportunity when I avoided doing that. I also avoided a real cold period where they would kill those tomatoes. So I try to use that kind of Memorial Day weekend still as my rule of thumb for when I plant tomatoes. So if you do, what you want to do is work backwards. So if that plant is going in the ground around Memorial Day, let's say May 25th, you want to be sure it's hardening for about 2 weeks before that. So in other words, you need to buy it 2 weeks in advance. Keep it, let's say, in your garage overnight. Expose it to the sun during the day. If you have a cold frame, which is a nice environment, you can leave it out all the time. But you want to make sure that it doesn't at night doesn't experience the cold weather completely, but it starts to acclimate for what it's going to be experiencing on the day you plant. Okay. And the same thing with the ones that you may have grown out of your basement. You want to do that, get them out there outside for some portion of the day, 2 weeks before you plant. Let's move on to the next slide.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Are tomato plants wind blowers?
No.
Now, if you have a raised garden bed, like a board or a wind block, something that.
Well, it may help, but it depends where you put it, because if you put a board, you're going to cast some shade.
Well, on the north, let's say if I put a.
Yeah. North or northwest, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you could do that, but no, they're not known to enjoy wind.
It's a quick question.
Yeah.
What's the plastic mulch you refer to?
And you said plastic. I said plastic mulch.
Yeah.
Oh, in there.
Yeah.
Basically, it's basically a plastic.
Covering the.
Yeah, cover. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and you dig hole, you cut holes in it. It's planted. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. Sorry. Okay, so we talked about determinate. They're bush-like. They're very compact, and one and done basically. When you have flowers and fruits all kind of come together at one time, where the indeterminate really are endless, so to speak. And you do have to do considerable effort in staking or caging them to help them not break off and so forth. Varieties are important. You know, you want to get seeds that have experience in the Northeast, both in terms of temperature, but also in terms of disease, adaptability to, and so that's something you want to be careful of. Again, I have some favorites that I've now found is three plants, and it's more than enough to keep me going all summer long. Salad every day, and despite that, just have 3 plants. Let's move on. All right, so I think we've duplicated this now. Those are good for container gardens, by the way. You know, so if you just want to have, if you don't have a plot of land, but you have buckets that you want to put on your deck or a patio or whatever, determinate are suited for containers where it just won't work given the way they. As I said, the cherries, the grapes, Big Boy, Beef Master are the best well-known indeterminate tomatoes. All right. So let's see what are the tips that we'll talk about on temperate cold this slide, and then walk on this side for a bit. Okay, so we talked about indoor. You know, I'm not big into starting things from seed in my home, maybe because I use so little of it in terms of tomatoes, anyways. But you know, some people will really go into an all-out effort here because they want to maintain some heirloom tomatoes that they've had in the past. They want to continue that species. So I give them lots of credit. It takes some effort. You know, it will take grow lights. It'll take obviously the right soil mixture. Often having a heating pad underneath the seed packets, the seed medium is a good idea. So it's a lot of work, but it can be very beneficial. I tend to use transplants for most of my stuff, and not just tomatoes, but peppers and the like. You've got to be real careful about the temperatures, because they do experiments. I once had one of those things. I got them out there early and saw a forecast that said it was going to get down to 29, 28, 29 degrees. I covered every one of them with a bucket. All right. And when I pulled the buckets off the next day, it looked pretty good, except the one bucket that had holes in the bottom that I hadn't noticed. And that plant was dead. So what a difference that little situation created. These guys are the full sun people in particular, are tomatoes. And just, this doesn't need to go under tomatoes. This can go under every plant. You need to enrich your soil with compost every year. I like to mulch my tomatoes. I use straw, grass clippings, particularly if you don't have a weed killing service that sprays your lawn. To do that, I would not recommend grass clipping. And with grass clippings, you have to be very careful. If you put too much grass clippings, they start getting slimy. So you want to make sure that grass clipping layer is maybe only 2 or 3 inches at most if you're using grass clipping. So
Let's talk about compost. So we started this compost pilot a bit now.
Yeah.
And you just talked about, putting that tomato in there. How do you blend your compost? How much per, what do you just?
Well, the composting is another whole new lecture.
Okay.
But let me just suggest a couple things quickly. You want to, the key to composting is the right mixture between what is called green materials and brown materials. Green materials are heavy in nitrogen, brown materials are heavy in carbon. If you have too much carbon, it slows the whole thing down. Okay? It's like if you, well, I won't do it now. It'll slow everything down. If you have too much green stuff, nitrogen stuff, it'll accelerate the process, but it'll go too fast, in fact, and it'll get slimy and start to smell. That can attract vermin to your compost pile. So you have to have that right mixture. As I said, there's a whole lecture on how to get that right mixture. But typical nitrogen plants are vegetable scraps or fruit scraps and grass, and the best carbon are leaves.
If you have, like, say, a 6x6 garden, you take a shovel, put it on top, and blend it in with your soil.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
Completely
the
cover
key to
it.
compost is to work it into the soil. If it's on the surface, actually the same material often is used for mulching. For example, leaf mulch. Leaf mulch can be used as compost. It can also be used as mulch. If it's used as compost, you want to work it into the soil. If you want to have it as a mulch on top, just layer it, put it on the surface. So I typically use straw. I don't use leaves, but grass clippings also can come in handy. I don't have a spray service on my lawn. I have Creeping Charlie and other things in there, clover. I'm willing to live with that, just not that to spray at my house. And so the grass clippings that come out of there are perfectly good for this application. Yeah, pinching flowers, particularly when you buy them, pinching suckers. There's a little growth that comes out between the stem and the first leaf. You'll see another little growth in there. Get those out. All that is part of promoting the health of the plant in general. This last point, let me expand on. My rule of thumb is you have to be in your garden every day. Every day. I didn't say you have to work in your garden. I didn't say you have to be in there long. But you got to be there every day, because every day something is happening. A lot of good things are happening. Your first tomato, your first pepper turned red or whatever. bad things are happening too. And the best way to deal with a bad thing is to spot it as early as possible and deal with it. Sometimes you'll see that this one plant is struggling. Something different about this than the others. It's not healthy. These are sacrifices. Get it out. Don't wait. Let's see if this gets healthy again. Yeah, you could do that, but you know what? It could also spread the problem to the other plants. So get it out of there as quickly as possible. I say an example I use with tomatoes is, are you familiar with blossom end rot on a tomato? It's this hard black bottom to the tomato. That's actually not a disease. That's actually a indication of a calcium deficiency caused by irregular watering of the plant. But let's not worry about that. Let's just worry about your spotter, right? Guess what? You are never going to eat that tomato. Okay? You're just not going to eat it. So why leave it on the plant? By leaving it on the plant, you're telling the plant, keep sending energy to that tomato and have it ripe. It may be the best looking tomato on that plant, but it's got a black end rot on it, and you're not going to eat it. So get it off. Give a signal to the plant. Don't send any more energy here. Send it to the other tomatoes that don't have blossom end rot. If you go there irregularly, you're not going to spot that as quickly as you otherwise would. So I suggest you go in the garden and enjoy it. It's something for you to enter in your log, anyways, and you can enjoy the garden, your successes. You want feedback as humans. We want feedback, how things are going. Well, this is an example of that. All right, so that's on tomatoes. Next slide.
All right.
That's all right. Peppers, and that's the seed packet that I got. So there's two kinds of peppers: bell, sweet types, and hot peppers. The thing I wanted to talk about is, first of all, with you can see the general information. How far apart to put them. They're going to grow. Remember, you should always plant any seeds you plant or any plants you put in the ground should always be evaluated from the standpoint of when they're fully grown. That's the distance that you're trying to accomplish, not what they're going to look like as babies, because they're not going to be big enough to interfere with each other. They like sun. They love organic material. So if I put, I told you I put compost with my tomatoes when I plant them. I really put compost in with peppers. You want to water immediately, but that's probably true of any plant. But 1 to 2 inches per week. They enjoy that. They enjoy humidity in general, and I do use mulch to spread on the soil in order to retain that moisture. One of the things when you're using organic mulch is you don't want the mulch to go right against the stem of that plant. You want to keep it about 1 inch away so it's not touching the plant itself or the stem of the plant itself. Bell peppers come in all kinds of colors. Yes, they all start green though. So if you get your first green plant, don't think it's not working. It will turn red or yellow or orange or stay green. And they're obviously very popular. Hot peppers, I don't typically grow very many hot peppers, but there is an infinite variety: jalapeno, poblano, cayenne, obviously red hot chili. And I only bring it up because they're all measured in how hot they are. And they're measured in something called Scoville units. And I grabbed the 2 seed packets from here to see if they mentioned what the Scoville rating was of these two. I got poblano and habanero. And they don't. Although they do tell you one thing, they have you one warning here. Wear gloves when handling to avoid getting on oils on your hand. So they have that warning on both of these. And yet they are in the 1 to 50,000 Scoville unit range. Okay. Have you ever heard of Carolina Reaper.
Yeah, no.
1.6 million Scoville units. And you know, and Scoville units up until about 2 or 3 years ago was measured by units. Actually, people would put them in their mouth, taste them, and then give a qualitative measure. Oh, that's hot. Or that's really hot. Now they've come up with some science that duplicates. I think probably all those people die. Right? But I can't imagine who tested Carolina Reaper. Now let's move on to the next one. We're gonna go ahead, go a little quicker. I think I'm falling behind. Oh yeah, I'm waiting. All right, sweet basil. You know, great companion plant for tomatoes, and it does offer some protection from predators. They don't like the smell or the oiliness of it or whatever. Again, it needs heat to get it in the ground. You know, the buds of the leaves can be used for pesto. I don't grow a lot of it, but obviously it's always handy to have when you're making tomato sauce and things like that. So basil. Next one. Eggplants.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Go back to the basil.
Yeah.
Because you guys have an herb like parsley. Is that? Because I've noticed that it comes back every year sometimes.
You know, I don't think technically it's not a perennial, but it does have, it must have biennial characteristics where it will drop off seed.
I still have it green in my garden.
Yeah. Well, this winter's has been unique by a lot of measures, but it's true. It has the ability sometimes to survive a winter or to drop seed and create new plants in the spring. So, but I don't think it's technically a perennial. Doesn't have that characteristic. Eggplant loves it hot, loves it. You know, you'll find that a lot of these solanums are very similar in that they like a lot of compost, a lot of organic material. You can do some in containers, stake them if you do. And there's some varieties over there that you can consider. If I grow eggplants, usually it's the black variety, but there are all kinds of new things now available. And you really need to use transplant. That will not work by putting a seed in the ground. It would take too long. So you might as well start with good transplants. All right, next one. Potatoes. I grow a lot of potatoes. I stopped for a while because I could not avoid this problem right here. Colorado potato beetles were just so fun. But it was the past 5 or 6 years, I haven't had a one. And I've grown probably more potatoes recently than in the past when I did have the problem. You really want to start with, first of all, they do like a low pH. So this is a situation where I mentioned that in a raised bed you have a chance of reducing the pH, and whereas in the ground it's very difficult to do. So I try to maintain one of my raised beds that I avoid the rotation. It's my potato raised bed, and then every year I'll do things to try to get improve or reduce the pH. What I do is, you know, I start with seed potato, which I can get from a good garden store. You know, you can get all kinds of varieties, usually about 60 to 70 cents a pound, and then cut them. You know, look at each potato, examine each potato seed, and cut them so you can get obvious growth on all the slices that you've made. Sometimes I can slice them into 3 pieces, mostly 2 pieces. Sometimes they're small enough that it's just 1. I'll plant them in a shallow trench, and then what I'll do is I'll fill up during the course of the year as that plant grows taller and taller. A lot of potato beetles you got to be on the lookout for, and you harvest when you obviously the green is starting to fall down, turn yellow, and fall over. But you can get some great harvests from potatoes. They store relatively well if you have a situation about 45 to 50 degrees. They'll store almost the entire winter. And frankly, what I don't use up for the winter is probably going to be seeds for the following year. Just this week, I saw an article that suggested, it's just as good to plant potatoes in the fall as it is in the spring. And I had never thought about that before. And so this year I'm going to do a spring planting, a fall planting, and see how the two compare and how that comes out. All right, move on to the next one. And then just some examples, obviously that trench we talked about, and then hilling up. This guy's hilling up, and you can see you get some pretty nice yields. Potatoes, I probably got 100 pounds of potatoes this year. So that's good enough to last for obviously the whole winter for us. Cucumbers, they love to climb, and so letting them just lie on the ground is not in their nature. They just won't produce as much as a result. So getting them up in the air, they like wind blowing through them. Like everybody likes organic material, we know that. And with cucumbers, I also I've had some problems in the past couple of years getting good ones. And good one is not defined as necessarily the biggest one, because they'll have too many seed in them. So you want to get them early when they're once they're in full production mode, they will grow every day. They'll grow by a very noticeable amount. And if you're in your garden every day, like I suggested, you'll see that growth and know that you got to stop it and yank it. All these really like warm weather. So these are probably the last things I plant. I don't grow pumpkin, but I do grow some melons and cucumbers. Those are the last things I do. So they're probably first week of June before I will risk to take the chance of planting those things. But there's still enough time to get a yield, a harvest in before it gets cold. All right, next one. And that's just an example of obviously some cucumber hanging off a trellis to show off. All right, next. Spinach is pretty frost tolerant. It actually doesn't like when it gets too hot. It won't even germinate at certain high temperatures. I directly seed in the ground with spinach seed yeah, when harvesting, what you want to do is you can actually, particularly with good scissors, you just cut the plant, and it'll continue growing. So that actually enhances the growth by trimming it and using that as your. You don't have to pull it out of the ground. You just competition. That's always good. And just like lettuce, you want to be careful that it doesn't bolt. Bolting is when it just has a spurt of growth, and that becomes hard. And again, just like your tomato blossom rock, you just won't eat it anymore. So you might as well get rid of it. Move on to perhaps a second crop. The same thing. All right, let's move on. Radishes. I love radishes for a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is right here. Interplant with carrots. I'm a carrot lover, okay? So, and carrots can go in the ground very early. So, typically you grow carrots in a row, okay? But it takes minimum of 21 days for that carrot seed to germinate and pop through the ground. And even when it does pop through the ground, it is so small, so close to the ground, you barely see it. You have to get down your hands and knees and look for it. So let's say it takes 28 to 30 days before you have a visible sign of a carrot. Well, in the spring, the last thing you want to do is wait 30 days before you know that your garden is working this year, right? So what I do, and by the way, 30 days is enough time that I've forgotten where I planted. So we're exactly where that row is. Now, should I plant here or should I the next thing, I don't know where I put it. So the best solution to all those problems is to interplant carrots and radishes. Radishes pop up in about 8 to 10 days. And so within 10 days, you know where that row is of carrots. So what I do is I do carrot, 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 radish, carrot, 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 radish, or whatever combination you want. You get feedback it's growing in 10 days, you get feedback, you know where the row is. And by the way, that radish will be pulled out, but it'll be harvested within 40 or 50 days, which is only a little bit after the carrot starts popping through the ground. So it'll never interfere with that carrot.
It's not gonna make the carrot taste look like radish.
I don't think it does, it doesn't particularly that. But the other thing you can do is now that you know where you pulled your carrot or you pulled your radish, you put a carrot seed in there. And so you can fill in the missing blanks in the row.
Does that
So-
go the same for like turnips or parsnips? The carrots, or-
No, because they don't come up as quickly. So no, they wouldn't work as well. It would probably work better than waiting for the carrot. But this is the quickest way to know those things and to avoid interference. Because the turnip's going to take a long time to grow before you want to harvest it.
Right.
And so it will interfere with the carrots. Well, this will be out of the ground before the carrots even know that they were involved in an experiment. Believe it or not. All right. Okay, let's move on to onions. Onions are relatively easy to plant. They actually like sandy soil as opposed to sandy loam. I guess everybody likes loam. But they can survive, and as do carrots can survive in sandy areas. You can start them in indoors, but I usually go to direct seed. Although you can also buy the onion, whatever it's called. Yeah, and those are very easy to plant. They only need to go to the ground maybe 1 or 2 inches. So it's a very easy process. By the way, all this is suggesting that there isn't a garden day, a planting day, that there are multiple planting days to take advantage of the different conditions and the different characteristics of the plant. So don't think of, I'm going to plant this Saturday, I'm going to plant everything, because it just doesn't work that way. You want to do just-in-time planting. You can put a corn seed in the ground the same day you do an early spring variety plant, like peas. Okay? You could do that. What happens is that corn seed is not going to germinate until the temperature is warm enough to activate it, right? So it'll be in the ground maybe 4 or 5 weeks before it needs to be in the ground. Only bad things will happen during those 4 or 5 weeks. Either it'll be so rainy and it'll absorb all that water and burst and die, or some critter will find it, or something will happen. I can't think of anything good that's going to happen in that 4 or 5 weeks. So rather than getting in the ground early, wait until the temperatures are right and the conditions are right, plant the seed, which means you're planting peas on one day, you're planting corn on, 3 or 4 weeks later. So let's move on to the next one. So sets. What I was looking for. I love beets. I usually space them. Most of my beets are used for winter storage, so I use about the 3 or 4 inch spacing because they're going to grow big, and I don't want them, pushing up against each other. These are beets can start in the ground relatively early. There's that whole group of broccoli, carrots, beets, radishes, all that, and that's what I'm looking forward to in the first 2 weeks of April, if at all possible this year. Tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, that's in the mix. And then of course there's all kinds of things in between.
We just have a question here. What
Yeah.
does seeding indoors prior X weeks mean?
There was that. Where are we here?
Up on the top.
Very top.
Very top one. Yeah, so in order to, again, you're always working backwards. When you think your last frost is a certain day, let's say the weather forecast for the next 3 weeks says, hey, look, it's going to be great after May 15th. What you want to do is plan backwards and start your seed indoors prior to that. So you're always working backwards, whether it's in order to have the plant ready for 2 weeks of hardening, or having in this case, beets really don't need, I don't seed indoors. I almost always will grow right in the soil. There's plenty of time for them. And by getting in the soil, they're in a warm environment. The soil by this time is, even in April, is probably 45 degrees down below the surface. On the surface, you have different conditions. Obviously, it can get real cold if there's a cold night. Also get very warm if there's a hot sun. But what we're talking about is what is it like 4 inches below? And that's why you need a thermometer that has a spike on it. It'll take it down there. But I don't usually do seeding indoors, but if I did, what I'd have to do is work backwards. When do I want the seed to be ready to go into the ground? That's what I start to do. Okay. All right. Move on. We have a few more slides. All right, garlic. I love garlic, and again, you want to start with good seed garlic, which you can buy at most places. You don't want to, go to your grocery store and use the garlic that you just bought from the grocery store, because those typically are sprayed with certain chemicals that are supposedly not harmful to you, but they're harmful to propagating growth in the seed, in the garlic itself. So you just take one of these garlic cloves that you bought at a garden store, and you can break that into all its individual cloves, and so now you've got 8 to 10 seeds typically out of every one of them. Move on to the next one. This is one where you grow in the fall. So you can, as a prelude to your planting, you can get some organic material in the ground beforehand. You can do it also, obviously, with the planting itself. I don't do a lot of mulching. I go in 2 or 3 inches. I think that's sufficient into the ground, but you could mulch on top of your plantings.
And how do you know when it's time to harvest it?
Well, we'll get into that. Next line. Oh,
Yeah.
Guess we don't get into that. All right. Well, then, so I plant. I have a day in mind when I plant, which is Halloween. I always plant on Halloween. Just to remind me one thing I have to do that day. Get the pumpkin out, and get the straw bales out, and plant my garlic. What will happen is it will start creating some roots before it gets too cold. You might even see something pop up out of the ground, a little bit green pop out of the ground. It'll go dormant when it gets cold, but then once the temperatures warm up again, it will pick up and start growing like crazy. Typically, you're talking in the late May, June timeframe when you're ready. They tend to keel over. They get yellow and tend to keel, the stem keels over. That's when you can start harvesting. I have a rule also, about 10 to 15% of all my harvest is seed to the following year. This hasn't been sprayed as in the store, so it's still valid. And I've probably grown garlic for 20 years from something I bought 20 years ago. Somehow related, second and third, 13th cousin or something. But yeah, it really works well. But that's true of not just true of garlic. Rhubarb is a perennial vegetable, and you might think of it as a fruit, or it's either a fruit or a vegetable, however you want to think about it. I have got my rhubarb is 35 years old, and it's doing better now than it did 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I'm always amazed at how well it looks and how healthy it is. It says part shade, stick to the sun. It can get pretty tall, so if it's in with other things, if it's not on its own, you want to always, I think we heard someone mention north and northwest where the board that you were talking about, always put your tall things to the north or to the northwest of your garden. That's where the sun will not cast a shade. Remember, the sun starts in the east, goes to the south, goes to the west, and it's only, only in the evening, in the summertime, you get a little bit coming in from the northwest. So it never will cast a shadow on the rest of the garden. Although there are times when you might want a little bit of shade on your garden. And depending on what you're growing in that bed. So if you're growing a lot of lettuce, and I said lettuce bolts, it bolts in the hot sun and the hot temperatures. So having tomato plants that cast some shadow on that lettuce might come in handy. So if it's a strategy of yours to do it, then great. If it's a mistake, don't do it. Okay? Now, I have a lot of experience with tall plants, because one of the things I did in my past life was I was coordinator of the Parenton Community Garden. It was a 92-bed raised bed garden in downtown Fairport, and people would rent out one bed or two beds and be able to do some gardening there. I think my number one job was to have to tell people they're trying to build some kind of a huge trellis, 14 feet tall, and casting shadows not on your property, casting shadow on the next guy over. So I have to mediate those kind of issues. So I'm familiar with them. They do happen. In your own garden, you only have yourself to blame. So you've got the warning right here. If you're trying to avoid casting shadow, put your tall stuff on the north and northwest side. All right. Yeah, you're going to basically you're going to propagate this from root division. It's amazing how perennials like rhubarb and perennial flowers, how much abuse they can take in a transplanting situation. So they will experience shock, but the best way to do it is to try to be a little mindful and a little concerned about your plant. Use a sharp knife. Try to cut along natural. If you pull up the root and you see some natural breaks, try to take advantage, cut along those natural breaks. But they'll do well. They'll recover from transplanting and produce forever. Okay, asparagus. Asparagus is tricky in that it won't produce anything useful for for 2 to 3 years, depending on what you're looking for. If you started from seed, it'll probably take you 3 years to get there. If you start from crowns, it might be a little less, might be the second year. So there's lots of good information on there. I've had some of my asparagus is a good 25 years old. Although I have, you can see that it's not producing as much as it did before. So I've added a new bed to my own garden. What do you want to decide? Yeah, you want to plant them relatively deeply. They'll pop up. Okay, next. Lettuce is a lot of fun. It produces well. I've never grown a ice cored lettuce. Okay, it just will not form the head for me. So I've gone to I don't even bother trying anymore. It can be grown relatively early. I do go directly into the ground with seed. It works quite well, and but I can't breathe it in. But I do romaine. I do the various different. I've done some arugula. I've done other kinds of lettuces. Which is expected that we have some varieties to consider. Yeah, here's the different general types. This one just doesn't work. Okay, but the leaf lettuces and romaines I grow in my own garden.
I have a question.
I'd love to be able to.
Yeah, I'll read it to you. They said, I rent an apartment. I want to do a garden, but do in containers. What are the best plants for container gardens? I noticed you mentioned eggplants. How can I successfully grow peppers, tomatoes, zucchinis?
Well, tomatoes do the determinate tomatoes, first of all. And peppers, they will grow in containers. Let's be sure that there's, I fill that as much with compost as possible because it's a heavy feeder. And containers definitely have a bigger risk. I said the raised beds are a problem from the standpoint of drainage. They can drain too quickly, particularly if your edges aren't, the cracks aren't well sealed. Containers are much worse. You almost have to water daily. Yeah.
We do romaine, so. Do you have a rule for that?
Again, I would use good cutting shears and take 2-3 inches off, and the plant will keep growing. Yeah. Now, move on. So we talked about this northwest for tall plants. Here are some classic examples of tall things. The cucumber itself is not tall, but since you're going to put it on a trellis, it will become tall. Sunflowers, obviously, you know how tall they can get. Jerusalem artichokes, pole beans, again, you grow them that way to be tall. So you want to put those on the northwest side. You got the medium-sized plants, which are the bush beans, the determinate tomatoes, and so forth. And then you've got a whole bunch of smaller things, low to the ground, strawberries and the like. Probably 5 inches would be the maximum for most of these things. And those are mid-sized plants, but they're relatively short. So we're kind of working its way down to the smallest plants.
When would you plant sunflower seeds?
I probably do that around the same time as tomatoes, maybe a little bit earlier, because they're going to go in the ground as seed, whereas the tomatoes going in typically as a transplant. So you want to delay that tomato until it's one for the seed to probably go a little bit earlier. Okay, and then we're just going to just general comment about fruits. There are lots of things you can grow here. I have blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, pears, and peaches and apples in my yard. So as an example, and it's really nice. They all tend to be at a different time of the year. So I'm the strawberries obviously are the earliest. Go to raspberries, blueberries, then the fruit, the tree fruit becomes ripe. So I've always got something new coming into the house. Again, you want to keep them to the north and the west so that they don't cast a shadow. Frankly, you don't want them close to your garden in the first place because they're going to be competing for nutrients and for water and stuff like that. Going to the grocery store and buying these fruits is great. Going in the garden, picking them yourself, bringing them in the house is even better. So that's what I can say about fruit. So let me take a few more questions, whether from your